department with a focus on secure and competitive markets, data security, and data privacy and diversity in cybersecurity. Most recently, Tatyana worked as the Senior Policy Director for the U.S. Cyberspace Solarium Commission. I've been saying that like 60 times today. I'm getting good at saying it quickly. Focusing on U.S. government reorganization and resilience portfolios. She received an award for exceptionally meritorious service from the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. From 2017 to 2020, Tatyana also served at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency as the Cyber Policy Lead in the Office of Strategy, Policy, and Plans, where she developed strategies for strengthening the cybersecurity of our nation's critical infrastructure. Madam, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Bryson. Appreciate it. Welcome to our discussion today. We're going to be talking about the supply chain, some of the cyber attacks that have been hitting the supply chain, and then how we can work together, industry and government, in this critical area to address some of these issues. With me today, I have Alexiaa Jordan. She is the Innovation, Cyber, and National Security Analyst from the Lincoln Network. Nina Kollars, she is an Associate Professor at the U.S. Naval War College and a Senior Adjunct Scholar at the Center for New American Security. And Megan Samford, the VP and Chief Product Security Officer, Energy Management at Schneider Electric. So welcome, ladies. We have a very interesting discussion today. Nina, I wanted to go to you first. Can you take us through what the problems are with our supply chain and ICT and some of the geopolitical tensions that are underlying it?
That's great. Thanks for having us, by the way. Thankful to Bryson and thankful to Tatyana for bringing us together to have what is often a very wide-ranging, sometimes confusing, but ultimately incredibly important conversation. And one of the things that I think will bear out in this panel today is a conversation about ICT technologies, right, and their overlap with ICS and kind of why we should be concerned about it. And my colleagues will be down in the weeds with you, telling you all about the sort of really incredible vulnerabilities and attacks that we've seen come through our system. I just wanted to set the stage at a much bigger geopolitical level of the kinds of things we're talking about when we talk about great power competition and why we're worried vis-a-vis certain international actors. So without fail, a lot of our cybersecurity vulnerabilities are often about, in fact, the vast majority are about criminality. And so that's going to be opportunities to make money, opportunities to just be a jerk. But from the DoD perspective, which is where I come from at this angle, which is within the Naval War College, we think about this as part of a bigger scope competition between the United States and other rising powers in the world. And most often when people have that language, they're talking about China's rise. And so when people are talking about the rise of China in competition with the United States, the question of ICS and the question of control of information and communications technologies, what we're often talking about is China's, what they call the DSR, the Digital Silk Road. And that was a China long ago strategy, started I think in the 2010s, maybe even earlier, to push to digitize globally its products. And so we're talking about private sector actors within China. So not necessarily all private sector, because a lot of the private sector in China is funded directly by the government, but we're talking about your Huawei's, your ZTE's, your Alibaba's, your Tencent's. Those are your major actors in this digital Silk Road environment. The strategy for the Chinese, because they had a global strategy, was to try and get as much of their hardware and software out into the system, into other countries' systems, so that not only were countries using Chinese products, but they would become dependent upon them, right? And that allows the Chinese to either determine the rules by which data is governed, because they can they can use those technologies and that software supplier vendor chain to control how that stuff works. But also to sort of dislodge the United States from its position globally economically as a major supplier of these kinds of services. And so there's this bigger picture geopolitical wrangling going on. And when people talk about ICT vulnerability, they're usually talking about, they're kind of conflating two things. Sometimes it's about military application, and that's certainly a huge concern for us, the military, to think about the security of the communications of our systems. If we need to go into a 5G universe, somewhere in Southeast Asia, we would like to be working under US standards as opposed to some other country standards, Chinese standards. So that's one of the areas we're concerned about. But the much bigger geopolitical concern is just competitiveness of our markets. And so, because the Chinese are making such a huge move in all up and down the platforms, the services, the infrastructure, they are making big, they're setting the roots out globally and asking of our partners and allies, we need you to make a choice of whether or not you're going to pay for more expensive US goods, right? Or, so that's a risk, or are you going to then use the cheaper service, right? And this is a really hard thing to ask our partners and allies, right? Spend more money and potentially be insecure, right? Spend more money and then be more secure, right? Or do the opposite. And that's a really hard trade-off for countries as they're trying to develop. And this is really one of the core problems we want to talk about, right? Because if those systems are essentially owned by the Chinese, we have less leverage, not just the DoD, but economically. And so that's the bigger picture problem we're having, is just the sort of, we can't control the technology if we're not selling it globally. So I'm going to leave this right at this point and let my colleagues talk more about the vulnerabilities to come when you do that sort of thing, and in particular, what happens when you go up and down the supply chain. I know Megan's going to talk to us a little bit about the clarity between what we mean by supply chain and what we mean by supply chain SolarWinds, which I'm sure she's the expert at. So I will abdicate my throne.
Yeah, and I'd also add, China also released a 5-year strategy to try to wean itself off of foreign goods and foreign goods in their ICT supply chain. So I think we're sort of seeing some of this play out, not just in the U.S. but in China. You also see them starting their own CFIUS type process. So, you kind of see this happen across the board. Megan, I just wanted to ask you, you're at Schneider Electric, so you kind of see this from your perspective in the energy sector. Can you talk to us about how this affects ICS systems, and how what Nina described affects sort of, distribution generation facilities?
Sure, absolutely. So if you're looking at this from the ICS vendor perspective, it really comes down to how we source, how we build, how we ship, and how we help our customers maintain and operate the products that live in their environments, often for 10, 15, 20 years. And so many of the ICS vendors, in fact, I would be hard pressed to name one that doesn't align to or comply with ISA IEC 62443, but that's our international standard that governs this type of activity and governs, if you will, the requirements that we seek to comply to demonstrate trustworthy behavior in the space. And so 4-1 covers secure development lifecycle, which is how we define security functionality within the products and security requirements, as well as in addition to the inherent or embedded security functionality of the products and systems, but also the way that they are tested throughout the development cycle, everything essentially that our teams can be doing to ensure the security fitness of a product prior to its shipping and then living and being operated within a customer environment. And to zoom in on that a little bit, we can go through the process of secure sourcing, right? Picking trustworthy suppliers, right? And then once those components enter into your overall supply chain for building a product or a system of systems, that you have mechanisms to inspect different components to ensure that they don't have what we would call additional or undocumented functionality within the product. And really, that's a fancy way of saying backdoors. And so vendors can choose to look for this additional functionality, even at the microchip level, right? To get down and do the teardowns in a responsible way to ensure that what you are purchasing is exactly what you plan to purchase and insert into your product or system, nothing more and nothing less. And so at a very macro level, that's where the discussion is occurring in the ICS community. And there are tons of complementary supply chain programs that are being stood up by international security nonprofits, as well as governments around the world and local laws, right? Because they want to see that producers of products have an appetite towards demonstrating trustworthy behavior as a partner, as well as trustworthy and renewable security characteristics that we seek to put into the product. Because again, these products, they're going to be in the environment for a very long time. And so we really want to get it right before the product ships.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you also talk to us a little bit about how SolarWinds and the Oldsmar hack affected your thinking?
Sure. So with SolarWinds, in my mind, before SolarWinds was a supply chain hack and a global supply chain issue, it was in fact a product security issue. And that when these things happen, we do a lot of soul searching, saying, you know, if this was my product, or if I was part of this supply chain, how could I have caught it? How could I have prevented this? And to me, it goes back to, I don't know that any tool out there, such as static analysis or sophisticated pen testing, would have necessarily caught the lines of code that were inserted in with SolarWinds. The best bet that I think they would have had is in a manual, traditional whiteboarding code review activity, where other people have to be present in the room to check what we call a branch of code into the main trunk. And maybe a manual code review would have caught that enhanced or additional functionality that was inserted.
Yeah, it's complicated, and I think some of those steps get missed in the effort to get things to market quickly. Perhaps less so in the energy sector, but certainly you see that in IoT. So, Alexiaa, I wanted to go to you. Given some of these issues, what are some of the biggest efforts right now that are going on to address the problem?
There we go. Yeah. Hey guys. Yeah, so there are a lot of efforts by everyone who even lightly cares about this. It completely impacts, you know, the entire private sector, obviously the public sector. So the challenge is actually to get everyone coordinated, and that has been a very fair critique of the US government, and not just any one administration, not one party. It's like since Bush 2, you know, when we started this war. See, my DOD sis, I love it. She's like, yes. You know, we've had this, you know, let me not get too into history. But anyway, the point is that we've had a very specific kind of foreign policy, and now we don't have a nationwide kind of strategy and a foresight strategy to plan for these types of things. So I would like to talk a little bit about, just give a little bit about what the executive branch is doing, what federal agencies and the legislative branch is doing, what standardized bodies are doing, and what the private sector is doing. And I just want to, you know, kind of give that breakdown and show that all these entities are trying to do something. So, you know, because there's all these different moving pieces, executive orders are like the easiest kind of first things that come out, right? So we definitely remember in the Trump administration, executive order 13 something of the sort, 1387-3. I think. Anyway, and that was one of his executive orders, because he came out with several that had to do with supply chain security and telecom security. But he asked the Director of National Intelligence to produce periodic written assessments of threats, and he asked DHS, Treasury, Department of State, DOD. I kind of just call them like the big five. Like anytime you have to deal with like telecom issues and like supply chain issues, always DOD, DOS. DHS, Treasury. But anyway, all of them were supposed to create just like a written report of threats so that you could see this comprehensive thing that is coming to the president. And we're all like very familiar with his hostility, President Trump's hostility towards Huawei and ZTE. And notwithstanding how anyone feels on the trade aspect of this, you know, his administration's sight of like, one thing we're not going to do is have this company in our federal blood, in our state blood, when it comes to, you know, supply chain. I personally believe that couldn't have been more correct. Again, it has nothing to do with how you feel about how he handled it or whatever, but that was like, this needs to, at the minimum, get out of our federal lines of supply, because that makes you couldn't even fathom why in the world DHS, DOD would continue to contract with Huawei. Maybe Nina has something to say about this. You know, maybe there's something that I'm missing, but I certainly can't understand why. In the Biden administration, he also came out with an executive order that actually, I think this was in February, and it asked, Commerce, Energy, DOD, DHS, Department of Agriculture as well, which I think is very important, and the Department of Transportation to provide their a report on their critical goods, what they think that their critical goods are in accordance to what critical technologies are defined as by the federal government, their manufacturing capabilities, the resilience of those supply chains, and like blah, blah, blah. And he wants that report in the first 100 days. So I would actually like to see that report. But yes, so these are executive orders because while we still don't have like a federal kind of thing going on, plan going on, I think that requiring this in the first 100 days was like a very, very good move. In 2019, still under the Trump administration, CFIUS expanded its jurisdiction to include FIRMA because they passed the Foreign Investment Risk and Review Modernization Act. And anyone familiar with CFIUS knows that like they used to just only have to review businesses that foreign nationals or foreign entities or whatever we're going to take a large portion of. And then it was like, well, wait, hold on. We're going to review everybody, whether you're taking a large portion of it or not, because if you're coming into if you're trying to take any type of share of our critical infrastructure companies, we need to know you. And that ended up producing a lot of intelligence. And that was very, very important because you got people who just seems like an entity, just seems like a person, right? And once you just did even the smallest background check on them, you were able to see that, they may have been connected to, CCP and like whatnot, or have ties to certain businesses in China. So like that expansion was really, really important. Megan mentioned the different standardizations that the private sector follows. There are a lot of standardized bodies out there, but for example, I'd like to mention the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, who came out with, I guess in my opinion, a short 31-page document which outlined partnerships between the public sector and key practices that should be implemented with the public sector in cyber supply chain risk management. But like I said, there are more than just NIST out there, and there's more than just this report. But you have these different standardized bodies local to the United States, but then also international, as Megan mentioned. And in the private sector, while I do, we still have a ways to go, and I do have a fair amount of commentary on this as someone coming from the state level of government, how we can better integrate these two. I'm very happy to see more coordination with the private sector and the public sector because, I'm not sure if anyone was kind of like tracking this past election and how DOD, DHS, FBI, Commerce have made their lines of communication way more open to the private sector, to our election security bodies, to the private sector that had to deal with our elections, but not, just in that one example, but the fact that there are more open lines of communication makes me personally very happy because that is the type of, relationship that we need. And, I think the primary thing that we need is a national direction so that every president doesn't have to come in and do an executive order and tell all these people to go do a report that he's not going to get for X amount of days, months. And it's like, okay, thank you of this report that Trump already got. Now Biden has to re-get it. You know what I mean? It doesn't bode well in terms of like us moving as fast as technology moves. But yeah, those are some of just a handful of the things that are going on nowadays.
Yeah, agreed. And all of those are really important. And I completely agree with you on the strategy piece. I mean, I think a lot of us here on this panel are working together in the Secure and Competitive Markets Initiative as we're trying to develop a strategy to balance national security and supply chain and our sort of free market principles. So Nina, I'm going to go back to you because Alexiaa mentioned Huawei and sort of pulling that out of our systems, our federal systems, and I think that was the right move. But as you saw in the UK and sort of across the world, we had a little bit of pushback to the United States' efforts to clear Huawei infrastructure. Do you think that some of the transparency measures that the UK put in place and other countries have put in place are effective? Or do you think that they're more of a tactic because they base their foundation on adversarial geopolitical relationships?
So it's certainly not our preference as a country, right? So the United States has a very clear preference in what it wants its partners and allies to do. But I think as my European and in particular UK colleagues remind me, the threat that we see in China as a great power competitor is not exactly the threat that they see, right? They understand China differently, and it's not surprising that all sorts of countries understand what we perceive as a fundamental threat, maybe not an existential threat, but a fundamental threat to our economy. Other countries who aren't in our position are looking at this again from that cost versus risk perspective. And they're saying, look, if the costs can be made a certain way, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and just, sort of take that risk. And so while I wish in particular the Five Eyes countries could come together and agree to a single set of rules and standards, I just don't see it as being a practical approach. I think the United States is going to have to do more and better to, again, as my colleagues Alexiaa certainly said, stressed over and over again, we have to come up with a strategy that we can do sort of independent of our partners and allies. Certainly bring them along and try and cooperate as much as possible, but there's nothing we can do, and we shouldn't be doing, right? We shouldn't be trying to do with sticks what we can try and do with carrots. We should be trying to sort of sell the story of transparency and security that we've fought so hard to build for so long, and hope that wins out. But we can do more, as you well know in your project, but we can do more from an economic strategic perspective. But yeah, there's our partners and allies don't necessarily see the world the same way we do, and that's part of the hard part of getting this all to come together. And so I wish we could ask for more, particularly from a DoD perspective, but the reality is those threats don't feel the same. They don't feel the same, and we have to figure out how to make our partners and allies come along in ways that show the respect for their perspective.
Yeah, no, I mean, and we heard a lot of that when the two of us on our trip to Europe, when we were talking with our UK stakeholders. They're asking for the proof. They're asking for the reasoning. They're asking for our strategy. And one of the biggest questions is, if you do rip out Huawei, what do you replace it with? What's the alternative? What are you giving me? And the United States, I think they've made the appropriate call that we didn't have an answer for them, and that's not a sort of a strong way to go into this argument. But international partners aren't necessarily also the only ones that have some of these issues with cost of changing out or swapping out equipment, right, or protecting some of their systems. Obviously, Oldsmar, for example, right, is part of a water system that the previous panel was talking about. The lack of investment into water systems in local municipalities. Alexiaa, you were talking about your experience at the state level. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that affects state level leadership and what the sort of the ICS security and state level efforts are and the thinking there?
Yeah, so some states are more advanced in their policy creation than others, and it's so funny because some are more advanced in certain aspects than others. So like, for example, Colorado has a very, very good layout of their drone policy and like who can ship in drone products, and I think Illinois is like 33. Conversely, Illinois just headed up just started, I want to say in 2021 or like late 2020, its committee on technology, cybersecurity, and it's like a third name and whatnot. And they're just now hearing testimony from private corporations that are founded in Illinois, they operate in Illinois, and they're like, look, all this stuff that's happening, all this federal hoo-ha, and then we're getting all these regulations. What do you want us to do? We don't know what to do. And it's just like, it is both a strength and something to work through that we are a decentralized nation. So, it impacts states because how is one to accompany not like an AT&T, not like a Verizon, not like some type of mammoth Qualcomm or something like that, not a big company, but if you are a medium to small size company and you work within your state, how in the heck how are you supposed to be keeping up with federal regulations? How are you supposed to, be strong enough and follow all of the standardized recommendations from your NISTs and whatnot and the ISOs when you don't have that kind of money, that kind of infrastructure? And how are you supposed to defend? How is it a fair fight if, someone, an advanced persistent threat from China or Russia comes to attack you because they want this specific employee who has ties to XYZ, And, what we're seeing at the state level is companies and what state legislators and cities, especially in major cities, your Chicago's and your New York's, Miami is a very good example. They're trying to reckon with how do we help these companies and how do we kind of make some type of safety net. Different ideas about insurance has been floated around and whatnot, but really this is truly a burgeoning space. Personally, I'm going to do my best to help my city of Chicago, but it's just not a ton there.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, Megan, you work with one of the larger players, right? So, but the larger players even still continue to have some of these challenges, probably not on the level that, especially in the energy sector, right? Much more advanced, much more regulated than others, but you still see some challenges.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I mean, I think that the potential hack on the water wastewater system in Florida, that again was kind of a call to action. And if you're sitting from the view of an ICS vendor, in many cases we're still just pleading with customers and the public and municipalities and states, just get the devices off the internet. I mean, in many cases this is low-hanging fruit. This is not an advanced an APT or a nation state sponsored attack. This is, you've got a device directly communicating to the internet that I can go on Shodan right now and knock on the front door of the login screen of an HMI. I mean, this is low hanging fruit. If we, kind of had our, what would you do to instantly minimize risk? It would definitely be around assisting these state and local governments, municipalities, kind of the smaller owners and operators to say, this is how you run a scan to detect if you have something directly exposed to the internet. In my mind, that would drastically reduce risk. Now, when we move to the other end of the spectrum in terms of sophistication and interest of nation states to say, hack electric utilities or things like that, Department of Energy has greatly stood up capability in this area. And again, going back to the conversation of establishing trust in the supply chain ecosystem, DOE stood up a program called Citrix, which aims to establish a legitimate public-private partnership whereby companies like mine can voluntarily submit their products for in-depth and extensive teardown testing by Department of Energy to establish that trust and transparency. And my company, Schneider Electric, we were the very first company that raised our hand and said, absolutely, we believe that this is the right direction to go in, and we will partner to be the first to help figure this process out with you all. But DOE, they pick the products. They say, we understand this is your inventory. We know this about American critical infrastructure, and we want to test these products. And we say, here you go, it's being shipped. So that's a program that I am putting a lot of our team's resources behind supporting, and it's a really great effort that I would encourage others to participate in as well. With that, I think some of the things that you could see kind of looking out onto the future is perhaps a requirement for vendors to submit software bill of materials. This whole SBOM conversation, right? I think it's absolutely the direction that we need to be going. And lastly, I think overall, again, if you go back to some of the work that MITRE Corporation has done recently in laying out a framework for, again, I go back to this concept of establishing a trusted partner and product ecosystem. We want to be careful in the way that we lay on the table the items that surround concern around trust, right? What is it that we really want to put on the table that we are saying is something that we can and should be concerned about, right? Then we take that inventory and we say, what are the techniques, things like SBOM, that we can do to interrogate and investigate these concerns of trust? And then thirdly, how do we weight these, right? Because we can't do everything. So if we're using a true risk model, we have an inventory, we have tactics to establish and buy down that risk. Now, how do we prioritize where we want to focus? And again, I go back to demonstrating trust with products that have hyperconnectivity, things like HMIs and workstations. I've coined this term lately, and even DOE and others are picking up on it, but beachhead products. These are things like HMIs and engineering workstations where they can accidentally be directly connected to the internet. They have visibility of what we call level 4 and level 3 typology in ICS networks, meaning they're hyper-connected and they can see other assets, right? It will tell you everything that's connected. So if you're an attacker, you really need to gain a foothold in an HMI or an engineering workstation, because it will allow you to get that persistence on the network as well as the lateral movement that you want. And so in my mind, prioritizing and really focusing in requirements to those products that are going to buy down 80% of the risk, it makes a lot of sense to me. And then making this a repeatable framework so that at some point, all of these efforts do converge into something, right? And people get into the rhythm of, again, providing the transparency and following a process that's, hopefully not only US-based recognized, but internationally recognized as a system for establishing trust.
Tatyana, if I can just jump in really quick, I want to like second and third two things that Megan had said, which is, she is struggling with her, people in her field and her counterparts. Like, if you all could just understand to do these simple cyber hygienic things, we wouldn't have these types of problems. And, it sounds very, very simple, but when you do think about what's happening, or, the kind of questions and decisions that state and more regional lawmakers have to face, I mean, we need to get down to forget how to help. Well, don't forget it. Don't forget. I didn't mean to say that. I mean, in addition to how to help your small and medium businesses and how to help your own state's tech infrastructure, right? How do I keep my, Illinois Health and Human Services Department safe? There needs to be a completely as emphasized strategy on education. And that type of education needs to be for students, for teachers, for professors, for trade colleges, for community colleges. I darn near think that, the way that I believe it was Kennedy, I served with City Year Chicago is kind of under the umbrella of the Corporation for National Service. We darn near need a complete national call to this form of education, and then bringing more adults, babies, teenagers, young adults into this field, because it's not just super smart people, like Megan and Nina and all of the engineers that are going to be making these decisions. It's you can have all these smart people, and it's still not going to make nary a difference if the operators and the employees aren't trained on what to do or what to look for, even just super simple stuff. I worked for a crisis management firm for a spell, and one of the partners' logins was his name ABC or his name 123 or something real crazy. And this is a very well-trained, educated man. Do you know what I mean? And I just use that example to really highlight Megan's point of teaching these things. And I just wanted to say that needs to be coupled alongside programs like what the DOE has started, coupled alongside a national tech strategy, coupled alongside, bringing this down to the state and local level.
You're speaking my language, Alexiaa. Speaking my language. Nina, go ahead.
To her point. So I think it's really easy to get classed out of the conversation, or think you're getting classed out of the conversation when we start to talk all the acronyms. We're all guilty of this, right? And to talk about the technology at very granular levels. It's really easy to get classed out of the conversation. You think, I don't actually know what needs to happen to make these things better. But the reality is that technical controls are just one of a number of different security controls you put in place to make sure things are safer. And some of the most basic ones are the doors locked, right? Is the physical security of the access point secure? Is it secure, right? And then you've got your administrative controls. Is it a practice to change it? I mean, these are it doesn't have to rise to the level of high technique or AI algorithms to hunt down the best, right? The sort of the redundancies in software and the bugs, right? We need to, but we should remember that those security controls can be implemented not just in the technical manner, right? There has to be social, administrative, physical security controls, and those are actually available to the average person. And so again, I think you just need to be careful with these small and medium businesses, right? Just to ask yourself, well, maybe I don't have the money for a FireEye or a CrowdStrike, but I do have money to sort of install a couple extra locks and think about who has access. And so just walking through that process and thinking about how to secure better is, I think, just something that everybody needs to start worrying about.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, like it's there are things that everyone can do, right? Like some of these things everyone can do. And similarly, just because you're smart doesn't mean that you know everything about cybersecurity. So it's great to continue asking questions and listen to the experts and ask for help. One of the biggest things that I think we need to work on is sort of creating this sort of safety net for people to ask for help, to be able to improve our local, municipal, and state level response capabilities. Megan, I know you're big on the response side, because right now, the majority of our response and support capabilities are at the federal level, at CISA and at some of the other agencies. And if you think about how FEMA responds to natural disasters, it's the exact opposite. You start at the local level, then you go to the state level when you deplete your resources, and then you ask for help at the federal level if those are all depleted. So I think that we need to do similar work for cybersecurity. We need to go back to the to some of the lessons we've learned at the national disaster management level. Megan, I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
That I was just loving everything that you said about that, Tatyana, but yes. So I'm the founder of another public-private partnership called Incident Command System for Industrial Control Systems. And how this all started was 10 years ago. I was actually working in critical infrastructure protection for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And then shortly after that, I was an emergency manager for the Commonwealth of Virginia. So what that means is that I was trained in National Incident Management System, and it really stuck with me. Incident Command System did. And so I was a person, I did not get a degree in cybersecurity or anything like that. I was brought on to write response plans when I started at General Electric. And so response planning and tabletop exercises, things like that, that's in my DNA. And as we're writing these response plans within organizations, I was like, FEMA has a really good construct that we could be using. The incident command system works and it scales. And with cyber, we have our primary challenge right now is the workforce issue that Alexiaa was mentioning, right? We don't have enough people trained in cyber. We can't scale. We don't even know what our capacity is as a country for people that could be brought to bear if there was a national incident that impacted everyone. We don't know how many cyber responders we have because we don't type these assets, right? It's the same concept that if a local firefighter comes to respond to a fire in one jurisdiction and they need surge capacity, they can call in local fire departments from other localities and they'll come and they all know how to respond together. They all use common terminology like incident commander, planning section chief, ops section chief. There's no reason why we can't apply that construct to cyber so that we're able to scale our responses from a vendor to customer standpoint, from a partner to partner standpoint, private sector to government. It just basically provides a single sheet of music that we can all be kind of following. And I'm not telling people to go out and you have to rewrite your response plan that you spent, $500,000 developing. I'm not telling you that at all. I'm telling you that there is an overarching construct that will work to help us scale so that we can effectively use the resources that we have and respond together. So yes, that's what ICS for ICS is about. And I think that as cybersecurity matures, and again, the education piece where we democratize cyber and make this information more available, right? Kind of a top 10, don't directly connect your HMI to the internet, have a scalable response plan, all of those things. I think the industry is moving there, and there is hope. And a lot of this, sometimes the U.S. government doesn't, get the credit that it deserves, but these are ideas that were rooted in government, and they're here to partner with us, and they're being a responsible advocate for us. So I greatly support those initiatives.
Yeah, and I will. So let me give you a fun little anecdote, which I heard from one of my friends. She was one of the she was one of the VPs at Forescout, and Forescout does CDM for CISA, right? They sit on networks and on endpoints and detect intrusions, and they detect what's on your network. She said that she went into Army, Navy, Air Force, I don't know, an office, and they were scanning their networks, and the head of that agency said, "Oh, I don't. My network's going to be completely clean. I have strict requirements, and my network's going to be perfect." She said, "Okay, great. So then let us get on your networks." This is obviously federally approved. Everything was done by contract, et cetera. But got on so they plugged into the network, and they found an unapproved endpoint on inside his office. And she said, "So you said that you don't have anything that's unapproved on your system, that you're very strict on that. You have something in your office?" And he goes, "No, that's not true. I never plug in, things. I never plug things in. I only just have my Xbox just attached. It's fine. It's just my Xbox." So it can be really fun. I think that people, there's just numerous issues. But yeah, so, I wanted to ask all of you, or to any one of you, whoever wants to answer, what sort of ICS issue or concerns you most? What keeps you up at night?
I'll go first. I have a lot of, I'm sure we all have things that keep us up at night. I think the thing that doesn't get it, this is obviously, I'm speaking from the Naval War College, so it's not that I get paid to say this, but I sort of do. Maritime ICS is an emerging space. The maritime transportation system, as managed in part by the private sector, part by the Coast Guard, the ports, the ships, right? There's a sort of NotPetya is a story of maritime transportation sector being affected by a cyber attack that was incidental. Like, this is what keeps me up at night, because it's a project that nobody owns, right? There's no single owner of the MTS. And so the solution sets and the ways we get to safer and more reliable, to trust, as Megan keeps talking about, is still, that conversation is just getting started now, and it's going to be an intensely complicated one, just given the global actors. And we all found out during the pandemic just how important the maritime transportation system is, and it's part of our critical infrastructure. It's just part that floats on the water and goes everywhere else. And so that's what keeps me up at night, and I'm hoping that we can spend more time and energy thinking about how to increase standards, get better collaboration, think about how to do that better.
Alexiaa and Megan? Yeah, Alexiaa, you want to go?
Yeah, I'll go next. I'll also start with an anecdote. A 15, 20-year cybersecurity professional, we're kind of just like, talking about government and blah, blah, blah. He goes up, him and his team, they go up to work on one of our western states in a bit of a rural area. And he's tasked with securing this entity, this thing. And as he goes in to go do his job that he's contracted to go do, he's like, "Hey, I see a problem right here, and giving you all's proximity to the water and, blah, blah, blah. You guys really need to fix this because it wouldn't take much for someone to, connect a remote control access routers or, something of the sort to, and then you guys are, have a very broad network. And so once you're in, you're kind of in, and then like an enemy can kind of just move laterally around, blah, blah, blah. Him and his company were told to be quiet and do their job. And he was like, hey, in the final report, I just really want to make clear that I found this and blah, blah, blah. Nobody said anything. And what actually keeps me up at night is, it sounds like a little esoteric, but I'm serious. And maybe I should find a more formal or professional way to say this, but it's like ego or like not wanting to expose the truth or lose jurisdiction or like, these types of human elements that stop people from pursuing what is right and good and smart. This was just like one little baby example, right? And obviously I'm not giving a ton of detail on purpose, but I'm thinking and hearing of, other examples that I remember studying that are old examples in graduate school. This is like years ago, right? And I'm just sitting here and I think about the type of legislative fights that we have in Congress, the type of fights that we have between parties, because it's like very, very hard to cyber and all the security stuff. None of it falls cleanly into anybody's plate, which is why it just needs to be done. But a lot of times things get held up because of red tape from one agency versus another agency, and people don't want to work together and synthesize and do all these things. And there's brilliant people all over the world, but like, obviously I'm biased. I'm American. Love being American. Pretty happy to be here. We have some of the best minds, all types of minds, immigrants, minorities, women, men. I mean, I've come across some beautiful people, and to realize that a lot of their brilliance is not going to be able to come to bear because someone doesn't want to lose power, someone doesn't want to lose their contract, someone doesn't want to, those are actually the things that keep me up at night. And I know, like I said, it's a bit of an esoteric answer, but it's really the truth. I've come into entirely too many examples like that, and it's like, we really could get this thing fixed in a relatively short amount of time if people acted like we were all on the same team.
I will add to that the other thing of, well, this isn't my idea, so I don't want to take it up because it's not, I don't like it, but only because it's not mine. I think we need to get past those kinds of things and move forward on a lot of the different recommendations that have come out from the different commissions, including our former Nina Solarium Commission and others. Megan, did you want to add?
I 110% Alexiaa, and this is really, people ask me like, what would you do or what keeps you up at night? And here's the bottom line. In most languages of the world, the words safety and security are synonymous. They're the same words. And failure of security is a failure of safety. But we don't see the results that we want to in security because we don't have the accountability in security that the safety world has. If you work on a plant floor and as an employee, you observe something that you believe is unsafe behavior, you can report that and you have whistleblower protections, and OSHA will come in and you are protected and things will be made correct. In security, we can all be professionals that know about horrible dangers in this world, and we have no protection to tell anyone because we will be fired and we will be sued if that information comes to light. If you truly want safety level accountability and assurance, implement safety level culture and you'll see a change.
I think a lot of this is about culture, starting from the boardrooms down all the way to our lack of education at the K-12 level. We just have not yet kind of internalized the importance of cybersecurity like other types of national security. I really think that we need to sort of reconfigure our thinking to the 21st century challenges that we have. I feel like we still are too focused on the fights of the past and the attack surfaces that we had in the 20th century. I think 21st century, we need to move forward with with sort of broader thinking, with more creative thinking about, where our greatest risks lie, right? To Representative Langevin's point from the his previous speech and the panel before ours, they all talked about risk, right? Aligning the appropriate solutions to the risks that we see. I think right now we focus too much on risks that aren't as significant as the cybersecurity threats that we face, and we're not funding or resourcing, for example, appropriately. Opening that up to any of you guys.
You're reminding me of a story that we're all full of stories, I guess, today, right? So there's a gentleman who's part of the Shmoo group. His name is Bruce Potter, and I asked him once. I said, if you had, in fact, we gave him two cups, and we said, here's 10 pennies. One cup is offense, one cup is defense. Put the number of pennies in there that you think, right, what's the proper allotment of investment? He took all of the coins and threw them in defense, and he goes, we do not prioritize well enough the defensive end. And he's like, if I had to choose this, right, I would put every penny from here on out for a long time into that defensive cup. He's like, maybe you'll get one penny on the offensive side, but it's a hard problem, and there's a tendency that when you come across a really hard problem that you create a blindness to it, and you only work on the things that you know you can fix. And it's a big problem. It's so we really need to sort of sit down and do the really hard work of, and it's so small, right? It's small pieces, right? It's this board of elections in this county, and I mean, it's all that really hard work. And again, the more people we can get involved to sort of start doing and talking and getting those things implemented, like Megan's work in this space is pretty remarkable. Just being the thought leaders and getting folks on board and getting them to do just something is every step. Every step's going to matter, but it's going to be millions of steps. So we just got to get working on it.
I just always go back to the numbers. The defense budget is something like $714 billion. Now, granted, some of that does go to cybersecurity, right? $10 billion to cybercom, and that's our offensive capability. But for as large of a footprint as our critical infrastructure has, right? And by the way, 85% of it is owned by the private sector. Only $2 billion is what CISA gets to defend all of our federal networks, help all of critical infrastructure, and try to sort of find threats, respond to them, and be a supporting agency to all of the different states and cities across the country that get hacked on a regular basis, right? Ransomware against hospitals, and Atlanta goes down because, their systems get hacked. Baltimore, same thing. Water treatment plant in Oldsmar. All of these things are supposed to be done with $2 billion worth of funding, right? For CISA, it was one of the biggest recommendations from the Solarium Commission is to increase funding to CISA, increase their ability to do their job. Back to your point about defense, right? Like, I think perhaps it's just not as visible, right? The wins you get on the defensive end are not as flashy. They're not exciting. They perhaps aren't like, if you have or if you spend, like Megan, you said, $500 million on a response plan, no one will ever see it, right? Perhaps you never get hit in that particular way, but even just the planning, right? And that's one of the lessons I took away from our discussions with FEMA, just the planning to get all of that done, trains the people doing it for whatever happens, right? So even if and it also trains them to work with their counterparts at federal, state, and local levels, and other people in private industry to work together. It builds those connections. One of the reasons FEMA said that they were so good at responding to the Boston shooting was that they had conducted an almost exact a very similar training exercise the month before that shooting. And so they were very quick to respond and knew exactly what to do because those people had that the connectivity and had it kind of as memory, and so could do it well. So I'm going to go back to sort of all of you for kind of last minute thoughts as we wrap up the panel. Megan, I'll start with you.
Oh, you got me on the spot as the last one. No, that's no trouble at all. So again, I think that we can learn a lot from the safety world, right? We can enforce accountability. Before we enforce accountability, I think that we need to develop systems of trust that are verifiable, right? And that can scale across industries. So they should be internationally based, things that hopefully will be interoperable and agreed upon by all. And then, you know, I guess continue to be a good partner. I know that we're very involved with supporting Department of Energy, Department of Homeland Security, DoD. I will say that if supply chain security is new to you, it's been around for a long time, especially everything that you should be doing today that's being called out in executive orders. If you are at any point a supplier to the U.S. military, you already fall and have fallen under DFARS for many, many, many years. So I hope for those people that what you see coming out is not a surprise, especially if the U.S. military is your customer. But continue to be a good partner. My mom always said, you know, to have friends, you got to be a good friend. And so we're here. Anyone that wants to reach out or has any questions, you know, certainly reach out to me. And just really appreciate the time on the panel today. It was an awesome and very fun discussion with you all.
Thanks, Megan. Alexiaa, final thoughts from you?
Yeah, of course. I definitely want to second Megan's point. I will say that I didn't even think to, you know, pay more attention to what the safety, you know, the history of the safety community has done. And that's just, I mean, that was the most eye-opening, like, wow, that's fantastic. I just want to second what Megan said. I'm very, very grateful to be next to Dr. Nina, Megan, Tatyana. Obviously, thank you for inviting me. Very, very grateful to be here. Last thoughts. I care so doggone much about public-private cooperation. And I just hope, you know, to echo Megan's mom, if I'm a good friend or if I'm a good representation of being able to go back and forth between the public and private sector as I've done in my current life, but I just hope that if I keep exemplifying what I'm telling people to do by reducing their egos, by being willing to take on things that I don't know the answers to, being willing to work with partners that are unfamiliar or even adversarial to me, but they are American. That is all I truly hope, because this, you know, this problem of supply chain, it ends up coming down to, in my opinion, we didn't even get into the weeds of what can the government be doing specifically to help the private sector? What kind of capacity does this need to be funded at? Whose jurisdictions is going to fall under? You know, I have all these thoughts and whatnot. And while we could talk about these technical, grainy things, as Dr. Nina has said, it all kind of comes down to people's, in my opinion, it comes down to people's willingness to cooperate and do together. And I think that that is my takeaway. There's a lot of smart and granular things to go over and think about, but I swear it's really only going to happen if people are willing to, you know, put down their guard a little bit.
Completely agree. Well, Nina, I will go to you for final thoughts for closing.
I mean, I don't know that I can do better than my other colleagues on this panel. I do want to say thank you for pulling us together and for allowing us to raise our own private concerns about the space. I guess the only thing I would say is it doesn't really matter where you are in, whether you're private sector, whether you're working for government, or where you're just sort of, you know, Jane average wandering down the streets. This space is, there's enough space for all of us to be working on this. Right? There's never enough labor to work on this. So if you think this is interesting to you, but you're not certain how you can help, right? There's always my colleagues. There's always lots of folks who work in incident response. Like, start having those conversations, because if everything that you touch now, right, given ICT, everything you touch has these security questions attached to them. And so anybody who's interested, like, just reach out. I'm happy to try and help you plug into wherever you think you can provide substance. It's all technical skills, it's all social skills, it's all educations, trainings, and backgrounds. Like it's all hands on deck. And so if you need a pointer on where to go and how you can help out, just reach out.
All right, well, thank you all so much. I appreciate it. I'm gonna take it back over to Bryson. Thank you.
Hi there.
Hey, Bryson. Do you like my Yoda?
I do like your Yoda. It's difficult to see.
It's
Well,
small. I didn't
yeah.
want to be obnoxious with it, you know?
How could you be obnoxious with Yoda?
Okay, sometimes a little Star Wars is too much.
May the force be with you.
And also with you, Bryson, I guess.